Hello, my thrill seekers. There are a lot of scary stories out there that you definitely won't hear here. Enjoy. I've been driving a taxi for about 7 years now, and I've seen it all: drunken brawls in the back seat, merely taking drugs and getting away from a chase. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. How wrong I was. This story happened last night. Or rather, in the early morning. About 3 o'clock, I think. It had been a hellish shift, and I was completely exhausted, dreaming only of falling asleep. I had one last order left. Some guy was hitchhiking on the side of the road in an old residential area. I'd already turned off the offer, but I decided, okay, one last one and go home. I slowed down, and a guy got in. Average-looking guy. Gray jacket. Jeans. Nothing special. Only his eyes were empty. He silently got into the back, and out of habit I asked where we were going. Tell me the address. I'll have a drink in the GPS. He was silent for a second, and then told me to go where I tell him. A chill ran down my spine, and I tensed up. My first thought was to just drop him off. You never know. Maybe some gangster was trying to start a fire in the middle of nowhere. But he seemed fine, even tired. I was exhausted myself, and didn't feel like arguing. I decided that if anything suspicious started, I'd drop him off at the first intersection. Okay. I said, let's go. Give me directions. We set off. The first couple of kilometers were fine. He silently showed me the way along streets I knew. Right. Straight ahead. Left at the next traffic light. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe the guy's phone was dead. But he already knew the way. And then something strange happened. We pulled out onto the avenue. The road ended in a huge industrial zone. Straight ahead. A concrete factory fence. The road turned sharply to the right. Straight ahead. Quiet, he said from the back seat. And I chuckled. Where straight ahead? There's a wall there. We need to turn. I said straight ahead. I looked in the rearview mirror. It wasn't looking at me, but somewhere ahead, through the windshield, and without knowing why, I drove straight ahead. My hands were sweating, but nothing happened. The car just drove on. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, we were driving on a highway that I had never seen in my life. Perfectly smooth asphalt, and dense forest on either side. Not a single streetlight, just the light of my headlights. I started shaking. What is this? Where are we? I asked. We're just driving. There will be an intersection soon. Stop there. I looked at the dashboard. The navigator was going crazy. The arrow was darting across the empty screen. There was no reception. Not a single bar. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. Something started flickering outside the window. At first I didn't understand what it was. And then it dawned on me. Cities. They appeared out of the darkness for a few seconds and then disappeared again. A bridge with strange cast iron railings flashed by, and a feeling crossed my mind that I had seen it before. A square with an ugly monument to a man in a cloak flashed by. I had never been to these cities. I would have remembered them, but every street, every house seemed familiar to me, as if I had seen them in some past life or a dream I had long forgotten. At one point, we drove past a 5-story building, exactly like the one I grew up in. The same shabby balcony on the 3rd floor, the same tree under the windows, only the windows were dark. What is this place? I croaked, not taking my eyes off the road. These are possibilities, he said. Places where you could have ended up, but weren't. I didn't understand a word, but his phrase made me even more scared. We again drove onto the dark highway. The forest on either side grew denser, darker, the tree branches almost meeting over the road. Coming soon, he said. Get ready. Where the roads intersect. I looked ahead. There was no intersection. Only an endless black ribbon of asphalt. I don't know how much longer we drove. At the place where the asphalt intersected, a barely noticeable dirt road, covered with grass, the passenger said to me, slow down, you've arrived. I turned my head and looked out the side window. Right by the road, an old abandoned cemetery began, with crooked crosses, moss-covered stone slabs, sunken into the ground, and right in front of the hood, where the headlights were shining, a gate was visible, rusty, half open, as if inviting entry. The air in the car turned icy. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I slowly turned my head to look at the back seat. It was empty. The passenger had vanished. He had simply evaporated. A cold sweat broke out across me, and I jerked the door handle convulsively, wanting to jump out, wondering where my eyes were flying. The central locking clicked, locking me inside, and I banged on the window, but to no avail. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, and staring at those eerie gates. The engine suddenly stalled. The headlights went out, and darkness and silence fell. And in that darkness, I saw something in the back seat, where he had just been sitting. On the seat lay a neatly intricate uniform, a tactician's uniform, a dark blue jacket, and a white shirt, exactly like mine. The jacket's breast pocket was slightly torn at one end, and had caught on a nail a week ago. There was a tiny dark stain on the shirt cuff, from drinking coffee yesterday morning. It was my uniform, and I've been sitting here for several hours now. The car won't start. An old cemetery outside the window. The gate still ajar. I don't know who my last client was, but I'm beginning to understand where he took me, and why he left me a change of clothes. Apparently my shift here is only just beginning. My son found a friend at the playground, and now I don't have him. The swings at our playground never stop. Seriously, even when there's no wind, they keep swinging, slowly creaking, as if someone invisibly swings on them. Mishka and I moved into this new building a year ago. The playground in the yard had a slide, a sandbox, and that damn swing. Mishka loved playing there, and for me it was a half-hour respite, while he played in the sand. At first I didn't pay attention to the swing, but it just kept swinging. Maybe it was a draft blowing between the panel buildings, or maybe one of the teenagers had set it on fire overnight, and it just wouldn't settle down. A young mother's brain is already overloaded without worrying about physics in the yard. But days, weeks passed, and the picture remained the same. I'd come home with Mishka at 10 a.m. The swing was swinging. We'd go out for lunch, swinging, and come out in the evening, and they were still swinging and creaking. That sound was ingrained in my brain. Sometimes I'd even hear it at night, lying in bed. Mishka loved them. He'd squat next to them and just watch them go up and down. I told him, "Mish, go swing," and he shook his head and whispered to me, "It's taken, Mom." "Who's taking it?" I looked at the empty seats, and a chill ran down my spine. Once I couldn't stand it, waited, and stopped the swing with my hand. The cold metal burned my palm, and for a second, silence clawed out. I looked at my son, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the empty seats next to me, and he was scared. "Mom, are you watching her?" I jerked my hand as if from fire, and the swing slowly began to swing again with a drawn-out, dissatisfied creak. That evening, putting Mishka to bed, I asked who he was talking about, who she was. "My friend," the child mumbled sleepily. "We play together." I smiled. Of course, imagine my friend at his age. This is normal, even cute. "And what's your friend's name?" I asked, adjusting his blanket. He turned to me. "Alice." The name Elisa had become a fixture in our apartment. Mishka talked about her constantly. "Elisa loves it when I build a tall sand castle. Elisa says your cutlets are delicious." Elisa asks me not to turn off the light in the hallway. It's dark for her. At first it was funny, and I played along. "Tell Elisa thank you. Tell Elisa I'm afraid of the dark too." I was even a little glad that my not-so-sociable son had such a bright imaginary friend. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in the sandbox. Mishka was digging a tunnel, and I was scrolling through my phone. "Mom," he suddenly said without looking up from his building, "why doesn't Alice go to our kindergarten?" "Well, she probably goes to a different kindergarten, dear." "No." He shook his head. "She never goes anywhere. She's always here, waiting for me." It unnerved me. Always here. I looked around the yard, the empty benches, the sleepy pigeons. No one. "Mish, could you invite Alice to play with us? I'd like to meet her." Mishka looked at the swing, which, like the usual monotonous sounds, creaked. "She doesn't want to. She says adults don't see her and shouldn't see her." This wasn't so sweet anymore. It was strange. That same day, when I was picking up Mishka from kindergarten, I caught the teacher in the hallway, a nice woman of about 50, Maria Ivanovna. "Hello, I wanted to ask. There's a girl named Elisa in our kindergarten, maybe from a different group. My Mishka's just been talking about her nonsense." Maria Ivanovna frowned and adjusted her glasses. "Elisa? No, Lenelka. We haven't had any Elisa for the last 2 years. Not in your group. Not in the parallel one. I would have remembered for sure. Maybe he met someone in the yard." "Yes. That's the thing." I hesitated, feeling like a complete idiot. "We're walking alone. There's no one else. Children. We have great imaginations," she said softly. "Don't worry. It will pass." But it didn't pass. It only got worse. Mishka started talking to her, even when we were at home. He sits in his room, pushing a toy car and whispering something, answering questions, laughing. Sometimes he falls silent, and just stares into an empty corner of the room, as if someone is standing there. I once walked in on him when he was sitting like that. "Who are you talking to, honey?" "Alice. She came to play dice." I glanced around the room. Toys scattered across the floor, table lamps glowing. "Where is she?" "Here." Mishka pointed at a chair by the table. "She's sitting there saying you have beautiful hair." I don't know why, but at that moment I almost screamed. I had a terrible urge to grab my son and run from my own apartment. I literally felt someone's gaze on me. A gaze from an empty chair. I forced myself to smile. "We'll tell her thank you, and tell her it's time for the guests to go home. We'll be having dinner soon." Mishka nodded, whispered something into the void, and then turned to me. She left, but she was offended. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay and listened to the silence of the apartment, and somewhere far away, from the street, I could hear a familiar hateful sound. The swing was still swinging, and it seemed to me that today it was swinging faster. The drawings began suddenly. Mishka always loved to draw. His drawings hung on our refrigerator. Sons, houses, our family. But one evening he brought me a new masterpiece. On an A4 sheet of paper, it was a picture of our yard. Green grass, a blue slide and a swing. Next to the swing stood 2 figures. One larger, with yellow hair. It was obviously him. He was holding the hand of the second figure, a girl in a simple white dress. Only this girl had no face. Instead of eyes, nose, and mouth, there was just a smooth, empty, flesh-colored spot. "Misha, who is this?" I asked. "It's me and Alice," he declared proudly. "We're going for a walk. Why didn't you draw her face?" Mishka looked at the drawing, then at me and replied, "Who?" My blood ran cold. "She won't let me. She says you can't draw her face." I froze the drawing, said it was very beautiful, and that I'd hang it in the most visible place. And then, after Mishka fell asleep, I tore the sheet of paper into tiny, tiny pieces and threw it away in the trash. I was afraid to even hold it. But the next day, a new drawing appeared. The same scene, him and a faceless girl in a white dress. Only now they were standing not by the swings, but by our entrance. I tore it up again. On the third day, the drawing was lying on my pillow when I woke up. The two of them stood in the elevator. Mishka's hand was almost completely hidden in the hand of a faceless girl, and I stopped giving him markers, put away all the albums, all the pencils. He threw a tantrum, cried, shouted that Elisa would be upset, that he promised her to draw their room. I began to feel like I was going crazy. I slept poorly, constantly listening to every rustle. It seemed to me that a white silhouette flickered in the reflection of the turned-off television. I started taking sedatives, but they didn't help. Mishka became more and more of a stranger. He spoke to me less and less often, more and more to emptiness. Sometimes he ran to the window, waved his hand and shouted, "Elisa, hi, I'll be out soon." I looked out. The courtyard was empty. Nothing but rocking and rocking. I called all the developers, all the realtors who worked in our area. I lied that I was a journalist, preparing an article about the area. I asked what was here before our residential complex was built. One woman, an elderly realtor who had been selling apartments here from the very beginning, remained silent on the phone and then said, "Miss, do you need this? This isn't good." It was a vacant lot. And before that, back in the 90s, there were a few private houses. One burned down, and a family died there. The parents and a little girl. They say she was never found. Either she burned to the ground or ran away. Only her white dresses were later found in the ashes, almost intact. Her name was, well, popular. Either Anya or Elisa. I hung up without a word, and everything fell into place. This isn't fantasy. This is an imaginary friend. My son plays with a ghost. The ghost of a girl who died on this very spot. And I decided that we would leave. To my mother. To another city. Anywhere. Just as long as it was away from this yard, from this swing, from this Alice. I began frantically packing my things into a suitcase. Clothes. Teddy bears. Documents. Misha came into the room. He stood in the doorway and looked at me. "She won't let go," he said quietly. "She doesn't like you. She said that you want to separate us. She said that she will take me somewhere where you will never find me." That night was hell. I didn't let Mishka out of my sight. We slept together in my bed. I locked the front door with all the locks, closed the windows. I hugged him as tightly as I could, and said some prayers all night. It seemed to me that if I fell asleep, if I loosened my grip even for a second, he would disappear. Mishka slept peacefully, breathing evenly, not tossing and turning, and I lay with my eyes closed, staring at the ceiling, and listening to the creaking of the chins. Even through the closed window from the 8th floor, I could hear the sound. Around 3 in the morning, the sound stopped, and the silence was even more frightening than the monotonous creaking. Why had they stopped? Had something happened? I didn't want to look out the window. God, how I didn't want to know what was going on out there. I quietly, so as not to wake Mishka, got out of bed and tiptoed to the window. The yard was charged with the narrow yellow light of a street lamp. The playground was empty. The swings, they really were standing motionless. For a second I felt relief. Maybe it was all over. Maybe she had left. And then I saw her. She wasn't standing by the swings. She was standing right in the middle of the sandbox. A small thin figure in a simple white dress. She stood with her back to me. She slowly turned her head and looked up, straight at my window. I couldn't see her face. I jumped back from the window, covering my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming. "Misha," I joked, reaching out to hug him again, to make sure he was here with me. But the bed was empty. Misha was gone. I ran to his room. It was empty. The window in his room was wide open. I don't remember running down the stairs. I just flew down them. No creaking. The swings hung motionless. I ran to the playground. My heart was bursting with terror, and some last idiotic hope. Maybe he's here. Maybe he just came out to play. The playground was empty. Slide. Benches. Carousel. No one. And I looked at the sandbox. The sand was perfectly smooth, as if it had just been smoothed out. And in the center, 4 words were written. Simple and terrifying. "Now he's with me." Maxim had been working as a security guard at the dying Galaxy shopping center for 3 months. Night shift. 12 hours of walking up and down the floors, staring at grainy images on monitors and trying not to go crazy from boredom and loneliness. His partner was Boris, a mustachioed man of pre-retirement age, who treated his job with philosophical indifference. He'd been working in the Galaxy almost since its opening, and knew every crack, every creaking, every anecdote. "The main thing, man," Boris said, taking a drag on a cheap cigarette. "Don't meddle where you're not wanted. Hear a noise? Those are pipes. See a shadow? That's a mannequin. It's simple. Don't make up problems for yourself." One such tale was about a restroom on the 3rd floor in the farthest, almost abandoned wing, where most of the shops had long since closed. They said the last stall there had a life of its own. Sometimes they'd find it locked from the inside, even though the mall had been deserted for hours. Senior shift workers said that if you put your ear to the door, you could hear a quiet woman crying. But the strangest thing happened next. Every time they called a locksmith or simply broke down the door, the stall was empty. Only a puddle of clean, cold water was always on the tiled floor. "This pipe hums in a peculiar way, and the cleaning lady leaves the water there without bothering to think about it." Maxim encountered this for the first time at the end of August. It was a stuffy night. He was making his usual rounds at 2 in the morning. He reached the restroom. The door was ajar. A dim light was on inside. Rows of sinks. A blackened mirror. The smell of Lorca. Everything as usual. The first one, open. The second, open. The third one, the indicator on the lock was red. Occupied. A chill ran down Maxim's spine. He stopped. In the shopping center, except for him and Boris, who was sleeping in his closet by the main entrance, there was no one else. All the doors were locked. "Hey, anyone there?" he shouted. There was no answer. He went closer and knocked on the door. "Security. Open up." Silence. Maxim pressed his ear to the cold door. At first he heard only the dim light of the lamp, and then he heard it. It was a quiet cry. This is how people cry when they are in pain and fear, and there is no hope. It was a woman's cry. The guy's heart started beating faster. Maybe some girl hid before closing. But how could she sit here for 4 hours so quietly? "Young lady, are you all right?" he asked, as gently as possible. "Can I help you?" "Don't be afraid. I'm from security." The crying died down for a moment, and then resumed with renewed vigor, but still just as quiet. Maxim took out his radio. "Boris, do you hear me? Get in touch." After a long pause, the speaker hissed. "What do you want?" His partner's sleepy voice croaked. "We've got an emergency on the 3rd floor in the women's restroom. Someone locked themselves in the last stall and is crying." A heavy sigh was heard over the radio. "Maxim, are you serious? This is the same stall. I don't know if it's the same one or not, but there's a girl crying here. Maybe she's unwell?" "There's no one there," Boris answered irritably. "It's the pipes. I told you so. Get out of there. Don't bother me." "It's not the pipes. I can hear the crying clearly." "Okay." Boris gave in. "Try pulling the lock. If that doesn't work, forget it. We'll figure it out in the morning." Over. Maxim put the radio away and listened again. The crying continued. He tried to stick his finger through the crack under the door, but it was too narrow. Then he lay down on the floor, trying to look inside. All he could see was the bottom edge of the toilet and water. A thin layer of water covering the floor of the stall. He became truly scared. He stood up, took a couple of steps back, and ran, slamming his shoulder into the door. The door shook, but didn't open. Everything inside went quiet. Maxim froze. The crying stopped. "Hey," he called. No answer. He stood like that for about 5 minutes, but didn't hear another sound. Feeling like a complete idiot, he turned around and left. In the morning, he told the shift supervisor everything. Ton took the keys and went upstairs with Maxim and Uncle Kolya's investigator. The stall was still locked. "Well, let's see your ghost," Uncle Kolya said. "Get out your master keys." After a few minutes of fiddling, the lock clicked. The shift supervisor pushed the door. The stall was empty. Only on the floor, as the legend said, was a puddle. "You see?" the boss said, looking at Maxim. "The lock is jammed. The frame is leaking, and you started a panic." Maxim remained silent. He knew he wasn't imagining things. After that incident, every shift he found an excuse to go up to the 3rd floor. Most often, the cubicle was open, and no different from the others. But about once a week he found it locked, and each time he heard the quiet, broken-down cry of a mountain climber behind the door. He no longer tried to break in. He just stood and listened. He questioned the old employees, but they either laughed it off, or didn't know anything. The only one who agreed to talk was Aunt Masha, the cleaning lady, who had worked here for 20 years. They were sitting in her closet. "It happened," she said, lowering her voice and looking around nervously. "About 10 years ago, maybe more, a girl went missing here, and they were calling for her. The student came with her friends to go shopping, went into the restroom on the 3rd floor, and didn't come out." How did she not come out? Maxim didn't understand. That's how it is. The girlfriends waited and waited, then got worried, went into the restroom, and there was no one there. They looked for her all over the mall, called the police, checked all the cameras. 1 minute she goes into the restroom, and that's it. She never comes back out. Not through this exit, not through any other. Vanished. And what? They never found her. No. Vanished into thin air. The case was closed a couple of years later, written off as her running away. But we, who have been working there for a long time, know that something happened to her in that restroom. That's when it all started there. Crying. Doors locked. They say it's her crying. Her soul is tormented. She can't find a way out. This story wouldn't leave Maxim's head. He found old news archives online. A short note. A student went missing in the Galaxy shopping center. There was a photo too. A pretty girl with a kind, slightly shy smile. "You're working yourself up, man," Boris said one day. "This place is depressing, especially at night. You need a vacation." "Have you ever heard anything?" Maxim asked. "All sorts of things have happened," he admitted, "but I prefer not to think about it. You work, get paid, go home. That's it. But if you start listening to every little noise, you'll go crazy. Trust me, I've heard." But Maxim couldn't stop. It seemed to him that she was asking for help, and he was the only one hearing her. It was a cold October night. The wind was blowing outside. The rain was lashing down. In the shopping center, the flare-up of gas flared several times. The emergency generators were activated on a delay, and for a few seconds the Galaxy was plunged into darkness. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Maxim went up to the 3rd floor as usual. He already knew what awaited him there. The door of the last stall was locked. Today the crying was loud. The girl wasn't just crying. She was choking on sobs, as if something terrible was happening to her. Maxim couldn't take it anymore. He snatched up the radio. "Boris, get to the 3rd floor immediately. Urgently." "There you go again." A disgruntled voice rang out. "Boris, please. This time it's different. She's not crying. She's screaming. Bring a crowbar." 5 minutes later, he appeared on the floor, out of breath, crowbar in hand. "Where's your hysterical woman?" he grumbled. Even he, a hardened skeptic, couldn't help but hear it. And from behind the door came heartbreaking, terrifying sobs. "Your mother," Boris whispered, his face turning purple. "Open up, guards." The sobs grew even louder in response. "Get away," Boris commanded. He inserted the flat end of a crowbar into the crack by the lock, and leaned his whole body against it. The door creaked, and with a deafening crunch, the lock came off and the door swung open. They spun around the threshold. The stall was empty. Water splashed on the floor, more of it than usual. Something glittered on the wet tiles, right in the center of the stall. Maxim bent down and picked up a small silver medallion. It was old and tarnished, Maxim opened it with difficulty with his wiry fingers. Inside, under the cloudy glass, was a photograph of herself. The missing girl was staring back at him. The moment he looked at the photo, the stall door slammed behind her with a deafening crash. "What the hell?" she screamed. Boris began to pound the door with his fists. Maxim shined the phone, but Maxim couldn't move. The crying started again. It was coming from all sides. The water on the floor began to rise. It was already knee-deep. Boris stopped pounding on the door and froze. "Maxim, what is this?" Maxim raised his head and saw a vague, shimmering silhouette of a crying girl. The figure slowly began to raise its head. She extended a transparent hand, weaving it out of the water, to Maxim, and he heard a whisper, "Give it to me." Maxim felt the inhuman cold of that hand touch his fingers. He gave birth to his palm. The medallion fell into the water and disappeared. At the same moment, the howling stopped. The silhouette in the corner dissolved. The light overhead flickered and came on. The stall door opened. Boris was nowhere to be found. Maxim ran from the toilet and began to look for him. The radio was silent. Boris was never found. His disappearance became yet another unsolved mystery at the Galactica shopping center. The police assumed he'd simply quit his job. He had debts and family problems. Maxim quit the next day. He didn't tell anyone what really happened, and no one would have believed him anyway. A year later, a new security guard, a very young guy, started the night shift at the Galactica shopping center. An older, tired replacement guard gave him instructions. "The job isn't dusty," he said, showing them the route. "The main thing is to not invent any problems." They reached the third floor. "Oh, and one more thing," he added, nodding toward the restroom. "It's best not to go in there, especially the women. The plumbing there is terrible. The pipes hum. Water is always on the floor. And, it's not a nice place." He left, leaving the guy alone in the stupid hallway. The man shrugged and continued his patrol. As he passed the restroom, he paused for a second, and beyond the door he heard a strange sound, like crying. Pipes. He remembered the shift supervisor's words, and moved on. And behind him, on the door of the last stall, the red lock indicator silently turned to the locked position. It all started, as always, with a brilliant idea. Tanya, my best friend and roommate in the dorm, and I had stayed late at a classmate's birthday party. The party was held in a private sector, on the other side of the city, where public transportation practically doesn't go at night. The last bus had left an hour ago, and there was no money for a taxi. And then I, the great strategist, remembered. "Listen, there's an old pedestrian bridge over the river here. I saw it during the day when we were driving here. If we cut across it, we'll almost be at our dorm. About 20 minutes, and we'll be home." We stood there, surrounded by the light of a single street lamp. Behind us, the sleepy private sector. Ahead lay a dark strip of trees, and beyond them the river. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of our neighborhood flickered, so close and yet so out of reach. And between us and the house lay an old bridge. It must have looked romantic during the day, with its wrought iron railings and riveted beams. At night, it resembled the exposed spine of some gigantic monster, draped over one arm from one bank. "Are you serious?" Tanya looked first at me, then at the bridge. "It looks like it would fall apart if you sneezed on it. I heard it closed about 10 years ago. Come on, we're not hippos. We're lightweight. We'll run past and not even notice. Imagine, in half an hour you'll be warm in bed, instead of sprinting around the city." After a brief hesitation, my friend gave in. We made our way through the bushes, along the snow-covered path, and came out at the beginning of the bridge. The thick smell of river rot and damp metal hit our noses. "Hurry," Tanya muttered. I stepped in first. The boards beneath the memesims emitted a prolonged groaning creak, as if I'd stepped on something living. I walked a couple of meters, and turned around. "See? Everything's fine. Let's go." Tanya followed me, and the bridge creaked, like 2 ears of corn. We turned on the flashlights on our phones. We kept our heads toward the center. A minute passed, then another. The lights of the neighborhood, which served as our landmark, weren't getting any closer. On the contrary, they seemed to be getting fewer and fewer, growing dimmer. "Strange," Tanya said. "It feels like we're walking in place, but the other shore is still far away." I shone the light ahead. The end was nowhere in sight. I turned around, and then a chill ran down my spine. The shore we'd come from was drowned in thick fog that appeared out of nowhere. The lantern and the houses of the honest sector vanished, as if they'd never been there. "What the hell?" I muttered. "Fog? It doesn't look like fog. It's kind of black. And look." She shone the light down, and I also directed my beam at the water. The river. It had become wider. Now it wasn't a river, but some kind of boundless black sea, and our bridge was a thin thread thrown across it. "I don't like this," Tanya said. "I don't like it at all. Let's go back. Faster." We turned around and walked back. But the fog didn't dissipate. The shore didn't appear. We simply walked along the endless bridge in the opposite direction. We were trapped, on a piece of rusty iron, suspended between nothing and nothing. We stood, clinging to each other, and simply looked forward, then back. "This can't be," Tanya whispered. "This can't be. It's just some kind of optical illusion. Fog. Darkness. Let's try calling," I suggested. But the phones couldn't find a signal. Not a single bar. Even the emergency call didn't get through. We were cut off from the world. What are we going to do? My friend looked at me. "Go. Only forward. There's no turning back. So we need to go forward. Sooner or later, this bridge has to end." Standing here and waiting for who knows what would be even scarier, we turned around and walked. Now we were walking almost closely. Me a little ahead. Tanya held on to the sleeve of my jacket. We shone the light at our feet, trying not to look around. We walked in silence. I don't know how long, Maybe an hour. At some point, I tripped over a protruding nail and almost fell. I felt her grip on my sleeve tighten. I took another step, and I felt her grip on my hand weaken, and then disappear altogether. Tanya, I called without turning around. There was no answer. Tanya, don't joke like that, I said louder. Tai as in. I turned around. Behind me was empty. The bridge, rusty railings, rotted boards, and no one. Tanya, she was gone. She couldn't have fallen. I would have heard. She couldn't run. I would have heard her footsteps. She just disappeared, vanished into thin air, and I was left completely alone. I shone the light from my phone around, at my feet, at the railings, as if hoping to find at least some trace. But there was nothing, and then I understood. This bridge, it's hungry. It takes those who step on it, one by one. I didn't want to be next, and so I ran, and I simply wasn't angry. Myri? Forward. Away from this place where my friend remained. Tears blurred my eyes, turning the already dark world into a blur, and I ran. Stumbling, falling, getting up and running again. There was only one thought in my head, to get out, get out, get out, and then I saw a light. It wasn't the dim light of the distant city we'd seen at the beginning. This light was different. Bright, white, it beat under the bridge ahead, bathing everything around in an even glow. For the last 100 meters, I no longer felt pain or fatigue. I flew off the wooden platform onto something solid. My legs gave way, and I collapsed to my knees, breathing heavily and coughing. Ground, real ground. I was saved. I lay there, my cheek pressed to the powdery surface. Then, staggering, I rose to my feet and looked around, and I wasn't standing on the bank of a river. I was standing on a huge, perfectly round platform. Tall lanterns stood at regular intervals around the entire perimeter of this platform. It was they that cast this white light, and there was nothing around. No road, no trees, no buildings. The platform simply hung in the same black void as the bridge, and I walked to the edge and looked down. There was the same abyss. I turned around. There it was behind me. The old, rusty, rickety bridge that had brought me here. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Directly across from the bridge, on the opposite edge of this platform, another one began. New, elegant, made of shiny silver metal and tinted glass, and its railings curved smoothly, and the surface seemed perfectly smooth. It looked like a work of modern art, and just like the old one, it disappeared into impenetrable darkness. And at that moment, on that new shiny bridge, I saw movement. A girl was standing there. She was standing at the very beginning, about a meter away from me, and then, slowly and smoothly, she raised her hand. She waved at me. I shook. Who is it? I tried to make out her face, but the distance, and the bright light, made it difficult. She took a step forward, stepping out of the shadows into a brightly lit space, and I saw her. The girl standing on that bridge was dressed in my clothes. She had my hair, my build. She had my face. She looked straight at me and waved again, and I realized that from this shore there was no turning back. There was only one more bridge to cross, and I knew that this time I was walking towards myself.